Well, South Africa is reeling in disbelief and, of course, shock following a spate of murders committed by school children. In the latest incident, a 19-year-old learner from Mondeor High School was stabbed to death by 3 boys between the ages of 13 and 15 years of age. And in the past month, we also saw 2 children aged 7 and 8 years old from Germiston who were accused of killing a 3-year-old boy. And in yet another separate incident earlier this month, South Africans were shocked by the brutal and senseless murder of Thoriso Themane, 27 years old, at the hands of a group of 15-year-old learners from Limpopo province. And joining us this morning is Claudine Ribeiro, Director of the Johannesburg Parent and Child Counselling Centre. Thanks so much for coming through this morning, Claudine. Now, it would seem, at least from the incidents that I've just mentioned, that there's something very, very wrong with our society. Why would you think our children would be committing such heinous crime? I mean, it probably doesn't get too much worse than murder, and yet our children are being found to be at the helm of this. What's going on?
I think that's the million-dollar question that we're all trying to answer for ourselves. I know that our society, I think these murders are a sign that our society is definitely under stress. If the most vulnerable people in our society, namely our children, are reacting in such a violent way. And I think we can't really pin it down to one reason, but I think we can say that our society has very high levels of anxiety, and that's causing people to act out in these ways, and these are being transferred onto our kids.
But let's unpack that. When we talk about high levels of anxiety, what are we talking about, and how does that manifest?
Well, I think it manifests in people being very pressurized, and perhaps family relationships are not as close or as meaningful as they should be. And I think the other factor that we're looking at is intergenerational trauma, where communities and perhaps families have suffered trauma over many generations, and it's coming out, you know, in the form of these very, very violent episodes that are happening in our own communities, where we never thought that this would play out like this. But it just means that I think our children and our families are very much under stress at the moment, and we need to look at ways to address that stress, to find ways that we can perhaps identify that children are really heading in this direction, and find ways to reach out to them. And I think that's the core issue.
Well, some may say, you know, this is crass, but the reality is our children are killers. And there's no easy way of, you know, trying to paper over that. Our children are becoming killers, and you spoke about the anxiety, but what does that say about our society more deeply?
I think it does cast big questions that we have to answer as a society. Is how are we looking after our families? How are we looking after our children? And what skills and do our families have to bring up children that are resilient, that can cope with the pressures that they are under at school and through social media? And that's the big question. Is I don't think that we are really addressing that adequately in our schools and in our families, due to lack of resources, for whatever. We work in a lot of schools, but we're a small NGO. We do the best that we can, but we can't meet the need, you know, on every level in every school.
But you know, there's this old saying that you can't give that which you do not have. So if parents themselves perhaps do not possess the skill set to help them deal with some of the pressures of everyday life, how then are they expected to pass those skills on to their children?
So I think that's quite key. If parents are under pressure themselves, suffering from depression and anxiety, also working long hours where there's very little family time, I think that the children are going to be the ones that suffer, and they are going to start playing out this very violent kind of trend that's happening. I also think we need to look at the issue of suicide, which is also another way that a child can maybe play out some of this anxiety and some of the violence that they're experiencing in their communities and in their families.
And, you know, tell me if I'm unfair in asking you this question, but What exactly is going on in the psyche of a child who commits a murder? Do we have any evidence, that helps us to understand this?
So I think the issue that we have to look at is this child able to develop empathy? And we have to look at factors that stop the child from being able to realize that this is another human being, and that by harming them and by killing them, we actually it's a very, very serious issue. And what stops a child from being able to develop empathy? I think again the trauma and the intergenerational trauma that's been experienced down the line in various communities. There's high levels of crime, and people are just exposed to very high levels of anxiety, and that starts playing out in the child. I think we've also looked at factors around increased use of cell phones and social media. When you are on the phone, you are interacting with a false person, with someone behind a screen, and there's not an immediate reaction like you and I talking together. And that can also, I'm not saying it's the only factor, but it's a reality in our life today, and it can impinge on the child's ability to develop empathy. They become very focused on themselves, their own needs. It's a very, their needs must be met, and they must be met now. And so the need to develop empathy is affected by those factors, I think.
That's very interesting. And the intergenerational trauma that you talk about, we are, of course, one of the most violent societies, and we come from a very violent past. It hasn't necessarily been dealt with, I don't think. So how then do we go about fixing this problem from where we are at right now?
So I think from our point of view, I can only talk about the work that we do, which is counselling in schools. We need more of that. We need more schools to be able to provide counselling services for the children that are suffering in this way. We need teachers to be skilled. So I think we have to look at it as a three-way relationship and team. And the first would be to empower people in schools to look at how to identify a child that is perhaps acting out, what to do when that child is behaving in that way, looking for the signs that would tell you, okay, something's not right here. And I know our schools are under pressure, the classes are large, the teachers are very pressurized. But at the same time, we can upskill our teachers. Then there's the home, trying to improve the parenting skills of people. And in these cases, I'm not attacking those parents. They may have been very good parents, but it is an element that our parents and our parenting can improve. And we can look at ways to help people focus a little bit more on their parenting and how they interact with their children. The third thing would be for the government and the Department of Education to perhaps help with this, to play their role in helping develop services in our schools, so that schools isn't just an education, it's actually holistic and looking after the child and their psychological needs as well.
Well, thank you so much, Claudine Ribeiro, Director of the Johannesburg Parent and Child Counselling Centre, talking to us about some of the recent events, murders committed by learners. It's 8 o'clock, time for your latest news.